Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today on Knowing Your Self-Worth and Get It. This is Dr. Rachel Cesar. I am the president of the Women's Veterinary Leadership Development Initiative. I am joined here today with Catalyst Veterinary Practice Consultants, and I would definitely like to make sure that we thank our sponsors today, which is Mariel, as well as our foundation partner, AVMA, as well as our in-kind partners, the Social DVM, and especially Beyond Indigo Pets, who's helping us record this webinar, and that will definitely be available on our website and as well as on our Facebook page. And just to make sure you guys are aware of what WVLDI is, we are an initiative that is definitely here to support women in getting into leadership opportunities in our veterinary profession, as well as in animal health professions, and doing as much as we possibly can to do that. So that's why we're collaborating as much as possible with others in the profession, and as much as possible trying to help with different types of opportunities to show you what to do to build up your confidence and to know, as like right now, and knowing about your self-worth. So today our presenters are Rebecca Rose, she is with Catalyst Veterinary Practice Consultants, and as well as Carrie McRudden, and she is with Colorado Therapy Care. So I will turn it over to them so they can move on and you guys can have this great webinar.
Thank you, Doctor. It's been a pleasure to work with you and the Women's Veterinary Leadership Development Initiative in offering these webinars. So here we are. Yes, Know Your Self-Worth and Get It. This is actually the third program in a 4-program set, and they've been building on each other. So now, your self-worth. So we know that the career in veterinary medicine can be rewarding, and it can be satisfying. It can be exhilarating and very challenging. It can be all of those things within a moment, within a day, for sure. And helping us overcome some of these challenges in leadership, in our career, personally and professionally, is what we're here to do. And that's why you're here with us. There is a Q&A section that will be at the end of this program. So there's a location on the screen here where if you have a question in the middle of the program, forward that, and Will and Dr. Cesar will be taking those at the end of the day, at the end of the program. So be sure to send in your Q&As, your questions. So today's topics include what the surveys show and what they tell us. I'm going to give you some staggering statistics, I think. And then Dr. Carey is going to talk about identifying personal values as being a way to know your self-worth. Certainly elaborating upon strengths and weaknesses. Creating clear and healthy boundaries is so very important and foundational to our success. And validating our expertise. Expertise as a veterinarian, expertise as a credentialed technician, maybe expertise even as a practice manager. Because I know in the past we've had all of those folks on these presentations. And then simply to be an enjoyable coworker. What does that look like? I will be giving you a number of resources at the end. And as I talked about earlier, there is a Q&A session. So please forward your questions. We'll run through the webinar and then we're happy to answer the questions at the end. So there will be notes accompanying this program as well. And I'm going to give you some statistics and even some quotes out of the first part of this. So the surveys say The American Veterinary Medical Association gave a report in 2013, and it showed that female veterinarians in private practice had a median income of $88,000. That's in the middle. That's the average. While male veterinarians had a median income of the same year at $112,000. And this was also a similar trend within the corporate practices as well. But when you look at that comparison, that's $24,000 difference. That's a big chunk of change for 1 year. But then when you also look at that compounding on what that may look like through a year, that's a staggering statistics. And we know too that the education of veterinarians are the same. It could be for the same expertise as well. So that's alarming. And there's a quote here, I'm going to read it, and it's from Hill and Day. It was reported in the gender differences in salary and practice ownership expectations of veterinary students. So this read, veterinary medicine has experienced a tremendous gender shift in the past 3 decades, and we can't deny that. That's most obvious. And today, most practicing veterinarians are women. A warning message from behind the pay gap study was that even women who make the same occupational choices that men make will not typically end up with the same earnings. Boom, there it is. And they go on to say that, moreover, if too many women make this same choice of earnings, that this could make a decline in the overall profession. And that was an epiphany to me. When I was doing this research, I was like, it finally hit home, right? I'm a veterinary technician. I've been a veterinary technician for 30 years. And when I look at this shift, which is where I've been, that impacts my earnings as well. And that was a big deal for me. It hit me kind of pretty much in my gut. So the income disparity may be caused by a number of things, and Dr. Carey is going to elaborate on this, but it could be that there's a broader societal context, simply the way that women's lives are impacted by the family, their approach to the business, simply pay negotiations, which is what we're going to have next month on our topic, and then simply just the choices that women are making as veterinarians. One last quote is from Dr. Stacy Pritt, and she's actually the past president of WVLDI. And she was quoted saying, "It's important to remember that veterinary medicine is not unique when it comes to the gender gap in pay. We're just following what everyone else in other industries is doing. We can accept it or give veterinarians the skill sets to deal with it." And that's why we're here. That's why Women's Veterinary Leadership Development Initiative is here. This is why Catalyst Vet PC is here. And this is why Dr. Carey is here, because we want to give you and your team these skills so that we can find solutions in valuing your strengths, establishing healthy boundaries, and holding your ground. That's what we're here for. And thank you for joining us. So Dr. Carey, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Hi guys, thank you so much for having me today. So in looking at the research on wage gap disparities between men and women, one of the most alarming things that I found is that we see these disparities in what women are paid versus what men are paid in 98% of professions. And there's several major reasons why this occurs. And one of them that is probably the most salient is that there are both conscious and unconscious stereotypes. And essentially, we discriminate against other women, and both men and women unconsciously tend to discriminate against women. So if you have 2 resumes with the exact same information on it, and one is named Julie and one is named John, John will get on average a $4,000. He will be automatically assumed to be more competent, even though it's literally the same resume as Julie's, and will tend to get a minimum of a $4,000 increase in the initial offer and pay. So, and then that increase gets larger and larger and larger the higher up on the scale that the pay scale that we get. So when we're into something like veterinary medicine, that median gap jumps to $24,000. So this is a really big deal, and this is a societal issue. We are not going to be solving a societal issue of discrimination today. But what we can take a look at is that sometimes women tend to sell ourselves short by being hesitant to charge full price. We'll be consistently discounting our services, or we'll have unclear reimbursement policies. And some of that is driven by our kind of the caring nature, and some of that is driven by our societal conditioning to be caretakers, and some of that is also driven by a fear to not want to look unkind or too greedy or any of those things. So again, we aren't going to be able to tackle all of those issues today, but I think that we can take a look at some of the concrete ways that we sell ourselves short and improve our ability to get what we are worth without having to necessarily fix all of society. So that first step is by taking a look and validating your own expertise. So Rebecca and I were talking, it sounds like a lot of folks in the veterinary industry, both at the tech level and at the vet level, they knew they wanted to work with animals starting at like age 7 or age 8, right? And so you guys are in a place where you know what you want to do, you know how much you care about animals, you know what a difference that you want to make. And then you go and you do the training and the schooling, and that's a really big deal, because either vet tech or veterinary training, it's extraordinarily technical, it's very difficult training. And so the first step is just noticing and understanding that you do have expertise that is worth being reimbursed fairly. And so part of how we look at that is that we want to start by identifying our values. So that next slide, Rebecca. So identifying both your personal and your professional values, and then we want to line that up with implementing consistent reimbursement practices. So I wanted to give an example. So if a man and a woman are both looking for a job, a man will look at a job description. And of course, this is, pardon the stereotypical discussion here, and understand that I know that you know that, there's exceptions to all of this. But on a typical job application, a man will look at it and he will apply for the job when he believes he's 70% qualified to apply. A woman will look at the same job offer and will not apply until she has decided that she's 100% or over 100% qualified to apply. So the way that we value ourselves comes through in how we behave, right? And so men have a tendency to be a little bit more confidence forward. Women tend to want to be more expertise forward. So we want to sort of prove ourselves first, and then our confidence comes along. And men tend to approach that pretty differently. So in undervaluing ourselves, we need to understand how is it that you want to be perceived? Do you want to be perceived as nice or open, approachable, competent, expert? And then how do you line that up with actually getting reimbursed? And I was discussing with Rebecca earlier that in my private practice, I'm a psychologist and I've had a private practice for a really long time. I had to make some decisions, yes, no, or maybe. Actually, it's a great slide to put up, Rebecca. I had to make some decisions about how I was going to be charging fees. And before I started with my business mastermind group, I was essentially a discount psychologist because I was giving reduced rate fees to almost everyone in my practice. And when I did the numbers, I had 69% of my clients were on a reduced rate. And in working with my business group, one of the ways that they have helped me understand my value and also how to balance being a caring, generous psychologist and being paid what I'm worth is that I decided to take a look at those strengths and weaknesses. And one of the strengths and weaknesses that I was looking at was, how do I feel about getting paid? And one of the things that I determined was that I needed to set a standard for what percentage of my clients would be on a reduced rate. So one of my weaknesses was that knowing what I was worth and then saying it out loud. Yes, I actually want to charge X number of dollars for my services. And a part of how you do that is you want to really identify what are you great at, and what are the things that are harder for you, and then collecting your team around that, so that maybe you have someone like an office manager help make up for some of those differences, help make up for some of those weak points. But the more clear you are on what your unique talents are, as well as what some obstacles are to getting things done, understanding your personality and what skill set you're bringing to your workplace, you have a lot more power to develop a team that can complement your strengths and boost them. And they can either cover for or help minimize your weaknesses. And this is one of the things I talk about in my practice all the time, because you're going to want to be able to simultaneously take a compliment and hear criticism. And women tend, again, and this is a little bit with us undervaluing ourselves, we tend to downplay compliments and we tend to maximize our weaknesses. And I believe that this is a portion of why we end up underpaid. So yes, again, can't fight the whole societal bias, but sometimes we have some responsibility in playing along with how things play out on a larger societal context. So moving on to that discussion about healthy boundaries. So setting clear and healthy boundaries is a very essential part of knowing and pursuing your value. So in using that reduced rate percentage in my practice, I went from 69% down to 10% or less of my practice is on a reduced rate. And one of the things you want to do with those boundaries is you want to be super clear, both with your team and with your clients, about what your rates are. And then you want to also be really clear what your fees are. Establish that percentage of discounting that you're willing to do and able to do, right? Because often women will discount even when it ends up harming them or harming the whole practice. And so you want to be clear about what percentage can you discount that's healthy for your practice, that feels in line with your values. And then my suggestion is actually to establish a reduced rate boundary that is a little bit lower than you think it should be. So for example, in my practice, my reduced rate boundary is 10%. And I try and hold it at about 7 or 8%, so that then when existing clients come in with an emergency or a job loss or a financial difficulty, then I have enough room in my practice to be able to accommodate what they're needing. And having conversations with your staff beforehand about how do you make determinations about when to give a discounted rate, and being extraordinarily clear up front about what your fees are, so that you're not constantly negotiating what your fees are on the fly. Because when you're doing that, then you're likely to end up in a position where someone wants you to be nice and you end up trying to be nice, and then you're not considering what you need to do to value yourself. So from there, that team player piece, I think that's our next slide. So the goal here is that you can be an enjoyable coworker, you can be an enjoyable boss, actually, and still have healthy boundaries around getting paid what you're worth. And so that balance between being enjoyable to work with, being in line with your values, and still getting reimbursed fairly, all of those things actually can go together. And I think that that's really critical to just to know and to think about. And again, you want to be setting things up in the beginning. So starting by understanding what your values are, how is it that you want to be perceived, and how would you like your business to run? Making that clear with your team, and then consistently implementing those policies. Those are all ways, the more clear that you are. Those become ways that people can expect a congruent experience with you and enjoy you, and also understand what your boundaries are about getting paid. That's just kind of a piece of what I wanted to say today, was about that notion of believing in yourself, understanding yourself, and understanding the difference between constantly discounting yourself and your value and standing up for yourself and getting paid what you're worth.
Thanks, Dr. Carey. That was fantastic. So lots of good information, great quick tips. Like, we know this is a big context. Like, you're talking the societal cultural shift that needs to occur.
Yep.
And it's not going to happen overnight. Obviously, we've been shifting into this for the last 30 years, and it's probably going to take a while for the society to embrace all the women that are stepping into all of the industries and what that's looking like in the United States and across the world, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. This is definitely going to take a while. And, and both men and women participate in this. So this is not a situation where men are bad and women are good. We all are participating in propagating this problem. And so it's important for us to challenge ourselves, not only to value ourselves, but to also value fellow females. And at the same time, to be doing that without hating on our men, because we love our men.
Well, and I want to let everybody know too, within WVLDI, there's a number of wonderful men leaders supporting this. So that's
exactly.
That's a good point.
This is not an anti-male. This is not an anti-male webinar.
No, not at all. I love my men. All right. We had talked about the personal values piece at one point, about really physically writing these things down and making them tangible. Can you give us maybe some more examples of that and how to make these personal values tangible?
Absolutely. And one of the fun things to do is you can go on the Google and look up values lists, and you'll get a whole bunch of different ones to choose from. But it's a great way it's actually a nice catalyst, to use your term, Rebecca, to start off, to kick off this activity. But go through and identify, like, what are your top 15 values on one of these lists? They normally have like 50 or so words on them. And then narrow it down to the top 10, and then take a look, what's more personal and what's more professional. And sometimes they overlap. Sometimes they are, really separate, so that your personal values are quite different than your professional values, and that's okay. But I do think that writing them down and sharing them is very important. And actually, it's a really fun exercise to do once you're clear on yours. It can be a really fun team exercise to do with your veterinary practice, and to identify what are the top values of the practice. And then when you can share that and share it clearly, then your clients are going to be more on board, your staff is more on board, you're more clear. It helps you make better decisions, even those decisions that you have to make on the fly, if you're really clear about what your top values are.
I'm all about that exercise. I help veterinary teams do that. It really is powerful to have the team create their values together, to find those common values.
And one of the things, you already have a stressful job as a vet. You never know when you're just going to have, an adorable batch of puppies coming in for their first shots versus, a really major traumatic car accident and, something happening with dogs or cats getting hit. And I'm sure that there are many more, things like that. But because you don't know on a day-to-day basis what your day is going to be like, if you understand your values and you're moving from your core values, it's easier to make decisions on the fly. It's easier to make decisions under stress, because then you have a framework to make decisions from, instead of just trying to negotiate in the moment or trying to respond to feeling badly, or your compassion comes up for someone. That doesn't necessarily mean that you discount your rate.
Correct. And another conversation you and I've had prior to this webinar is this idea of strengths and weaknesses. And I explained that when I go into veterinary teams, I'll ask them to think about their strengths and weaknesses. And I can ask them to identify their strengths, and there will be crickets. They have a really difficult time saying, this is what I'm good at. And yet when I ask them about their weaknesses, man, I can anticipate a laundry list.
Yep. And I think that's something in particular that women are trained to do from a very young age is don't get too much attention. Don't show your strengths too much. You wouldn't want to outdo anyone else. I mean, I think that's very old cultural training. And, once we're grown-ups, we can decide what of that cultural training you want to continue expressing and what of it do you want to resist and shift. And so a major shift is to be able to calmly, without, being over the top, be able to describe, what do you bring to the table that's positive? What are your strengths? It's okay to actually notice them and acknowledge them. And in my opinion, it's critical to do so, because if you can't acknowledge your strengths, then you're always going to be running away from your weaknesses. And you actually want a balance of managing your weaknesses and moving towards your strengths. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. Yes. And then this whole idea of that we are experts in the field, right?
Absolutely.
If someone, we veterinarians and technicians and team members have gone to school to learn what we're doing. And when a pet owner walks into our practice, we have a need. They have a need for us to fulfill. And we do that in a very expert way, a very professional way, the knowledge and experiences that we bring to the table. And declaring that, right? So even beyond that bio that's on the website, through these exercises you're talking about, look at yourself in that place of an expert and then valuing your worth around that. And I'm going to give some slides in the near future that shows what some of this looks like even across the region.
Well, and a part of owning your strengths and knowing what your true expertise is then you can efficiently refer when something isn't in your wheelhouse. It isn't in your expert area. And if you're afraid to look at your strengths, if you're afraid to say, well, no, I'm actually excellent at fixing this, but I'm not quite so good at fixing that. If you're afraid to do that, then you're going to try and be solving everything for everyone. And that ends up putting everybody into a difficult situation, right? Because then you're scrambling, and that isn't honoring your expertise.
Hi, I was going to ask a quick question.
Also know what you aren't the greatest at and have a lovely set of referrals that you can send somebody for that.
Go ahead, Dr. Cesar.
Oh, okay, great. I just didn't know if you guys can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. I wanted to see, do you think that there is a possibility of a way that in school to be able to help with students learning some techniques before they get out into their careers, in any of their career fields, be it the veterinary profession, being in practice or whatever area that they would go into, to learn a little bit more of how to gain these types of strengths?
I think that's a really great question. And I would strongly recommend that schools reward, and not just reward, but also sort of help cultivate an understanding in their students of what are they great at, what are the areas that they're weak at. So instead of this notion that you're looking for an A and you need to show off to get it, it's more of a grounded sense of, like, Dr. Cesar, you're an expert in this area, and Rebecca, you're especially good in this area, and and taking a look at what you bring to the table, and then what would you like to develop more, so that the weaknesses become less of a threat and the strengths become less of a either a showy sort of situation, or a something to hide because you don't want people to know, you know, that you're too smart or whatever. So I do think that and that may be a more cultural aspect to the schools in terms of how they go about helping students understand their strengths and weaknesses. And I know that in the corporate world, they're doing some interesting things with reviews. So the review process is often now what is called a 360-degree review, which is where you're looking at a number of different areas and rating yourself, and then your staff is rating you, and everybody from the janitor to the CEO takes a look at someone's performance. And you know, obviously that varies based on the size of the organization and all of that, but the concept is that everyone has valuable feedback to give, and you're taking a look across a broader context instead of just, you know, just one person taking a look at that. And so I wonder if there's some way to either bring that into the teams or into with existing practices or into the classrooms. I don't know. So I'm just kind of thinking out loud about that.
Well, the whole idea of giving and receiving feedback, we can all be better at that. And even to learn that as a student would be so valuable.
Yes.
Knowing that feedback is that give and take of simply information, and working with a team, if you get better at offering and receiving feedback, it's going to make you a stronger veterinarian on the other side of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it decreases the threat, right? Like as you're practiced with getting and receiving, you know, giving and receiving feedback, it decreases the threat. And that's a part of why it is important to start by taking a look at your values and then really concretely identify what your strengths and weaknesses are. And don't be afraid to ask other people, what do you see my strengths and weaknesses as? Because sometimes people will think something is just kind of them, or they aren't really noticing that it's a strength. And other people will say, well, I really appreciate this about you. And so understanding that that's something that other people see as a strength, so asking for some of that feedback, I think, could be really valuable.
And shows good leadership as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next slide. I snagged these from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is one of my favorite go-to spots. I'm going to have to talk to the BLS, though. This green clashes with our purple theme. So I'm going to have to ask them to change that. But seriously, the point here is this shows how many veterinarians are in a state. I'm in Colorado. This doesn't surprise me. We have a high percentage of veterinarians. Obviously, California, Texas. So I thought this was interesting, right? The next one, and you can go to bureauoflaborstatistics.gov and find all of this, plus even more incredible information on the salaries and wages and benefits. Cost of living isn't here, but there are other sites that show that. Because when you're looking at where you're living, if you're in California, cost of living is high. So let's hope and determine that you're going to be making a higher wage there. Cost of living in Alaska is astronomical. So keep that into consideration too when you're looking at your value, your worth, the benefits, what that looks like for your team and you as an individual, as a veterinarian. So this one shows the annual mean wage, the average wage, and this is for May of 2016. So wow. Previously, Colorado has the highest number of veterinarians, but we're in the lower price range. I was just floored when I put that together for veterinarians. I look at this for veterinary technicians all the time, but now I was looking and focusing on the veterinarian aspect. So the darker blue is the higher wage, and the lighter blue is the lower wage. So keep this in mind, folks. This is a great place for you to go and compare what are you currently getting very objectively, and what are other people in my region getting. And there will even be information on here as tailored to cities. What does this look like within a city? So again, one of my favorite to-go websites for resources along salaries and wages. So in your handouts, there are links to the references we made, the gender differences in salary of veterinary students, the gender gap, why do female veterinarians earn less than male veterinarians? And this, again, is not a new topic. Dr. Pritt made the point earlier that it also happens in other industries. I can remember speaking with Dr. Melanie Marsden, who is currently one of the veterinarians in leadership within the AVMA, and her and I were talking about these exact topics 5 years ago. So we just need to consciously value our worth and bring that to the table and hold true to those values. There's a good book by Sheryl Sandberg, although it's been controversial when it first came out. It's called Lean In. I found it very educational. And the book Code of Confidence was fascinating. For me, it was a bigger book, but I just plowed through it because it was talking about how our DNA is different. And Dr. Carey talked about it earlier, about how a man will look at a job description or an announcement and say, oh yeah, I feel like I'm confident and really good at 5 of these. 2 of these I'm kind of washed out in, but I'm going to apply. Where women typically don't do that. If you had an extra day or 2 and wanted to read something, I feel this book, The Code of Confidence, is very valuable for you along these lines and along this topic. And we speak in the Catalyst Chronicles about wages and team development frequently, and values, and the exercise that Dr. Carey was talking about as a team, identifying the common purpose and common goals. We are doing perfect on time. So there's our next webinar is coming up on November 9th, and we will be sending out information on that. You can find previously recorded webinars on the WVLDI website as well. So with that, Will and Rachel, do we happen to have some questions from our audience?
I'm not showing any questions yet, but if anyone has any questions, please type them now into the Q&A section here in Zoom.
And folks know that they can always reach out to us later as well.
I did have one comment I want to also make, was that I do agree as well about the 360 evaluations. That's something that we use significantly in the government. And it definitely helps tremendously to utilize that, so you can be evaluated across the board from, like you mentioned, like from all your employees, from your fellow colleagues, from your direct reports, from your supervisors, from everyone. It's very, very helpful to know like what you may not think that your strengths are or what your weaknesses are. Because like for example, I think one of my strengths is that I'm very giving and very helpful, but actually it can be considered a weakness because I overextend myself sometimes. And I may not be able to get everything done that I need to get done. So, and so I'm like, oh no, I can't get to this now. And so yeah, so that's where it can be sometimes considered. I think it's I think it's a strength, but it really can be considered a weakness. So yeah, I think it's been really helpful for me to look at those evaluations.
So doctor, I'm curious, when you give those evaluations and you're evaluating everyone else on your team, do they explain to you how to do that objectively?
Objectively, yes. Well, definitely, I think so. And then also, it is anonymously as well, because what happens is that they give you they give you like an array of like names that you can pick to send them to. So, and you don't know, like for instance, like I can say like there's 15 individuals that I want to be selected, and then they may only have 5 that take the survey. So, and I'm not sure what 5, you know for sure that it's going to be
your direct supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
But it may not be all 10 of your employees. If it's like, if you have 5 employees, they'll put out for all 5 of them, but it may only be 2 that is selected to do the survey. So I think that's the thing, is like, you don't, and it's like multiple choice. So I think that's where they try to keep it more objective, and you don't know who for sure exactly is saying it. So then you
Right. There's definitely pros and cons to doing 360s within veterinary hospitals. Yes.
Yeah. So, and I think that's the thing, is like, you have to also realize as well, they're like, look, you know, this is going to be helpful. And I think the thing is that with my, I think what's helpful is that if you do have a 360 evaluation, it's part of a whole, like you said, a team approach.
Mm-hmm.
And it's part of a leadership training as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that someone, you know, you have a facilitator or something of that nature as well, so everyone can agree to understanding that, look, you know, this is going to be constructive criticism. This is going to be helpful for everyone, and no one's going to feel, you know, bad about it or anything in that nature. Because that
Precisely. It definitely can elevate leadership. There's no doubt about it.
Definitely.
So, Will, I'm curious, are there any questions?
Looks like we don't have any questions.
Okay. Well, with that, we will wrap this up. Again, Dr. Cesar, thank you for sponsoring this and helping us and bringing us to this platform. Dr. Carey, it was a pleasure to speak with you and present with you today. Thank you for your words of wisdom.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. I hope it was helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And as we wind this down, know that attendees that have registered will receive the notes as well. And we look forward to seeing you next month when we talk about the next step in negotiations. Thank you very much.